And welcome to Paranormal Versus. I'm one of your hosts, Michael, joined by Kell and Matt. And
hello.
So, how is everybody doing today?
Yeah, quite good. Yeah. Sun's out, very happy. Things are going well.
Yep.
I know, it's so rare to have the sun in the UK.
Yeah.
Shocking, yeah. I almost went out and reported at the police there was a big orange disc in the sky, but turns out it was just the sun. So,
Yeah, you know, and that brings up an interesting thing I've been reading about recently is talking about the color of the sun, that is actually being classified as a Mandela effect because there are people that swear it was yellow. Now it's orange. And people are like, when did it change? Did it change?
Yeah.
I thought it depends on how low in the sky it was.
Technically, it's orange. But I think because of our atmosphere, when you see it during the day, it looks yellow. And then when the sun sets, where it's further away and lower in our sky, that's when it appears orange. But its true color is actually orange.
Yeah, and have you ever noticed if you watch it, it like looks like it's spinning and there's like a white aura around it?
Yeah.
I don't actually look at the sun. It hurts my eyes, so I would know.
You're missing out, Cal.
Yeah, I'll go outside and go blind myself.
I would recommend that. Hey, look, we have a Kell Ridley in the chat group.
Wow,
yeah.
She looks a bit like me, doesn't she?
Huh.
So, how's you guys anyway? What any like things happening this week?
Michael?
This week we have this week is pretty much ending. It's Thursday, so my week is pretty much done.
Have you done anything exciting?
Well, I had this is my third show. Tuesday night was a really interesting show with Paul Dale Roberts, and learning about he did 205 disco dancing hours.
Wow.
Only 5-minute breaks to break the record. And it was like, wow. And we were like, did you sleep? And he goes, nope. You could sleep in the 5-minute breaks that you were allowed to have. So we learned Guinness, when you do a record per hour, they allot you a 5-minute break.
Wow.
And then and then last night I talked with Lily Nova about her being a astrophotographer, cosmic channeler. So that was really interesting.
Wow. Busy week for you then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would usually ask Matt at this point what he's been doing this week, but I already know, so.
Yeah.
I think we all already know.
Yeah. Nothing supernatural, nothing paranormal, nothing alien UFO based, just getting this place sorted and packed up, really. So, yeah. Huh.
Cool.
But it's almost there, which is good.
Oh, good. And that's probably a good thing, considering the amount of time you have left.
Exactly. Yes, I've got a week now before I need to be out of here. So, yeah. Huh.
So
So
there
what
you
about
go,
you?
folks. We were talking backstage about the evolution of Matt's background for the
Oh, yeah.
fans of the show. We started with this studio, and we're like, yeah, that's really cool because he does our music for the intro and outro.
Huh.
And then as he was packing it up, we discovered there was a window, and now we discover there's a garden.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah.
And he's going to have to leave it. Oh, poor Matt.
Yeah. Oh, well. Onwards and upwards, that's what they say, isn't it?
That's very true.
Agree. And with that being said, I think it is time to bring up a guest who I have the privilege of welcoming to the show, as he was on a show of mine on Tuesday night back in January, my second episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. Shameless plug. And he has such amazing information that I was so grateful that he agreed to come on to this show, because it'll blow your mind, the information that he has to share. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to the one, the only, the amazing James Szubski. Szubski. I got it right this time.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
And I got your last name right. I messed it up at the first, but I came back with it.
It's a hard one. I think only my third grade teacher is the only person who came in, had it cold, and got it right. So,
so for our Paranormal Versus audience in the UK and US, could you share a little bit of your background, James?
Sure. So the reason why I'm here on the show is that about 3 years ago, my wife and I inherited a number of businesses in the Columbia River Gorge. And so the Columbia River Gorge is sort of a world famous place of intense natural beauty. The Columbia River is the largest river in North and South America that flows into the Pacific Ocean. And it forms the border between Washington State and Oregon State and America's Pacific Northwest. And so it is it's like right in the middle of the Cascade Mountains. And so my wife and I inherited a couple of stores, and one of them is an outdoor adventure store. And it wasn't long before, we began operations there, that people started coming in and telling us really astonishing stories. They were telling us about encounters with Sasquatch, UFO and UAP sightings, interactions with portals and ghosts. And it was, truly amazing. I was fascinated by what we were hearing. And so I put up a big sign in the window that said, "File your paranormal reports here." And I gave the staff very specific instructions. I told them that anyone who comes in with an unusual story, we're going to treat them with the utmost dignity and respect. We're going to ask intelligent follow-up questions. We're not going to question their sanity. We're not going to snicker and laugh at however strange their story is. And we're going to take in the data and see where it leads us. And here we are, just under 3 years later, after starting this program, and we have got, I think the last count is over 330 paranormal reports that have been filed with the store. And it is, first of all, been just this amazingly wondrous journey for me. Imagine that like 2 or 3 times a week, a new Scooby-Doo mystery walks through our front door, and people, we have a reputation as being a safe place where ordinary people can tell extraordinary stories. And the things that we've heard and the mysteries that we've begun to uncover are sort of a 10 out of 10 in terms of paranormal activity. I know that we are only getting a fraction of the reports, only a fraction of the people who are having experiences out here are coming to my store and filing reports. I am certain that the Columbia River Gorge is one of the most active paranormal hotspots in the entire U.S. There's really kind of no question about that. In fact, Washington State has the highest number of UFO sightings per capita and the highest number of Bigfoot encounters per capita of any state in America. So a little bit about myself and my background. I am a highly decorated U.S. Army infantry veteran, a former wildland forest firefighter, a mountain guide, and a nationally certified search and rescue EMT. And so I have an awful lot of experience in the wilderness. And when we moved down to the Columbia River Gorge, I felt like I had fallen into heaven. So just to give your listeners a sense of what the gorge is like, Columbia River has been here for 20 million years. It is an extremely powerful energy current that's been flowing through this landscape literally since before the mountains were formed. And the Columbia River flows directly through the Cascade Mountains. Cascade Mountains extend from southern British Columbia all the way to northern California. Total landmass area equals basically, if you took the 10 smallest states in the United States and mushed them together, that's the approximate size of this vast mountainous, extremely rugged wilderness that we're in. About within 35 miles of my store, there are 3 stratovolcanoes that are perpetually glacier clad. So that's Mount Hood, which is a famous Sasquatch hotspot, Mount Adams, which is a famous UFO hotspot, and Mount St. Helens, which famously erupted in 1980. And so these mountains form a rain shadow, and on the western side of the mountains, it's this deep, brooding, and mysterious Pacific Northwest rainforest. There are over 90 named waterfalls on the Oregon side of the gorge alone. Some of them are over 600 feet tall. And then on the eastern side of the mountains, you've got a austere, beautiful, and spiritual desert. And so you get desert mesas, with flat tops and steep cliffs. There are hundreds of caves in the area, whitewater rafting, rock climbing, mountaineering, windsurfing, paragliding. It's basically an adventurer's paradise. And when I got here, I thought, oh, this is amazing. This is, perfect for a guy like me. And then come to find out that it is populated with all types of mysterious cryptids and strange phenomenon. And so it has been just this amazing voyage of discovery and so many interesting mysteries to uncover. So like Sasquatch, one of the things that struck us is it seemed like everyone who lives here either knew somebody or had a Sasquatch encounter themselves. And it's so common, it's almost like seeing a bear for the folks in the area. In fact, Skamania County, so the gorge itself is about 80 miles long. The southern side is Oregon, the northern side is Washington. On the Washington side, you've got 2 counties, Skamania County and Klickitat County. My home is in Skamania. My stores are in Klickitat. And Skamania County, back in the 1960s, was the very first governmental body to enact Bigfoot protection legislation. And so it is, if you kill a Sasquatch in Skamania County and it's determined that it's a humanoid, you will be charged for manslaughter. And so They take it pretty seriously out here. So tons of Sasquatch reports, tons of different types of UFO and UAP reports. My wife and I have had experiences along those lines ourselves. There are some areas in the gorge. So the gorge is comprised of probably maybe a dozen small towns. The biggest one has got maybe 20,000 people in it. Some of the smaller ones, have 800 people in them. So, and some of those towns are just ghost hotspots where there's tons of paranormal activity in that regard. Lots of strange cryptids. And the one that's really captured my imagination and one that I think we'll spend some time chatting about today is a creature we call the Klickitat Ape Cat. And we have had over 120 reports of this enormous Black Panther-like creature. every report describes a very large, a very muscular black cat with a long black tail. And about half of those reports say that this creature is of enormous size. We're talking about 4 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and that's larger than any known cat that science recognizes on the planet. And there are a handful of reports, and it's just a very small percentage of the reports, say that the creature has got a face that kind of looks like a monkey. It's got primate features, intelligent eyes. And I want to be clear, these reports, they come in. Some of them, some people have seen the cat's face very clearly, and they don't report this ape-like countenance. Other people have spent 5 minutes looking at the thing, and they're certain that it looks like a monkey. So we're either dealing with a shapeshifter, maybe 2 different kinds of creatures, or some type of reporting errors. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of theories about where this creature comes from. There are Native American legends that seem to indicate it may be part of that tradition. There are thoughts that it may be a holdout from the Ice Age. There's an animal in the fossil record that matches a creature this size that lived in Washington State 10,000 years ago. But there's also some theories that it may have to do with UFOs and aliens. There's a big alien cat theory that's out there. But surprisingly, the most rational and reasonable explanation for why we have over 100 reports of a large Black Panther creature is that it escaped from a government nuclear facility and their animal testing program just upriver. So lots of incredible stuff to talk about, and happy to jump in wherever you guys want to.
So when was the first time you were made aware of anything like this? Like cryptids and stuff like that and ghosts?
So I came out to Washington State way back in 1988 with the military, and my buddies and I would come down here and adventure. And we, even as soldiers stationed in Washington State, we used to have to do land navigation oftentimes at night, and we were certain that we were walking through areas that were just a Sasquatch hive. So like even back in the 80s, we were aware that Washington State has got a lot of cryptids. But in terms of the most recent activity with the store's reporting program, and the store is Margie's Outdoor Store. It's located in Bingen, Washington, which is approximately 60 miles east of Portland, Oregon. So it was almost immediate once we decided to take over the businesses, and I began, participating in the daily operations and, leading the teams. It was within, I would say, less than a week that we started hearing people coming in and organically telling us these stories. And it's just been, like I said, a remarkable several years as we've heard more and more tales.
Interesting.
So, James, I want to take a moment, though, real quick, and say thank you for your service. We greatly appreciate it. We know you sacrificed a lot, so thank you.
My pleasure.
So you were talking before about this cat-like creature. So what is your actual theories on this, where it came from?
Sure. So just to give you a little bit more detail on some of the stories that we've heard, the very first report came in, a guy came in, was close to closing time, and his family had known my mother-in-law, Margie. And so they were kind of friends of the family. She had helped them out with some, Margie was a very accomplished pharmacist. And so she helped his family out with some medical issues they were having. So there was some kind of connection there to begin with. He said that he was orienteering, so map and compass work, about 3-4 miles west of the store in an area called Buck Creek. He came across a creature. First, his compass started acting weird. That is interesting, but not uncommon. The gorge is known to have some pretty significant magnetic anomalies. When you look at the government navigation maps of the area, there are bright pink letters on these maps that warn you that your compass readings will be off in the gorge. And in fact, we have such a unique and epically apocalyptic geologic history here in Washington State and the gorge itself, that these geologic forces that have formed this place, which is, like I said, stunningly beautiful and unlike any other place in the world, have also created an extremely unique, nuanced electromagnetic environment. And one of our leading theories is that it's because of this very strong and complex electromagnetic environment is contributing to why people are having so many paranormal experiences here. So I'm going to take a little bit of tangent to bring you up to speed on 20 million years of geologic history so you can understand what I'm talking about. So like I said earlier, 20 million years ago, the Columbia River Gorge, the Columbia River was flowing through this area. It was basically draining during the Ice Age, the ice sheets, right? And so that's the water melting off of those ice sheets. Well, 17 million years ago, a giant fissure opened in the earth. It was nearly 100 miles long. This was at the Idaho-Washington border on the eastern edge of the state. And trillions and trillions of gallons of lava spewed out of this thing. So this lava flowed down the ancient Columbia River Valley 300 miles to the Pacific Ocean. And just to give you a sense of how much lava we're talking about, there's some areas of Washington State where it is 3 miles deep. If you took all the lava that erupted out of this over a 2 million year period, and you spread it out evenly over the United States, it would bury the entire lower 48 states in 60 feet of lava, the entire country. So it is a massive amount of molten material that came up from the center of the earth and, just rolled out across the landscape. Well, it didn't just happen once. There were over 300 eruptive events. And as they flowed down the ancient Columbia River Valley, they sort of stacked up on each other. And when you look out here now, you can see this sort of layer cake of rock. Much of it is this columnar basalt, much like you see in the Devil's Causeway up in your stretch of the woods.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Is that right?
Well, it's an island.
Northern Ireland, isn't it?
Yeah, Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And so it's that really amazing columnar basalt. It's hexagonal.
Wow.
Rock. So what's important about this is that as that lava flowed and it cooled, all of its magnetic material inside of the rock oriented towards the Earth's magnetic North Pole at that time. And then as it cooled, it locked in place. Then maybe 1,000 years, maybe 10,000 years pass, another eruptive event happens, you get another layer. But the Earth's magnetic North Pole has wandered. Like in the last 100 years, the North Pole has wandered 700 miles. And so over the course of 1,000 years or 10,000 years, it wanders dramatically. And that second layer of lava, now its magnetic material orients to the new North Pole and then cools and gets locked in place. So there are areas of the gorge where you can see 40 or 50 different layers of rock. Each one of them has got its own unique magnetic signature, right? So very unusual in that regard. Then 2 million years ago, the Cascade Mountains started rising up volcanically, and all those layers started buckling and forming basically pointed mountains. So you take that crazy magnetic situation and then you make it even crazier. And then 15,000 years ago, we had the world's greatest floods. And that is not an exaggeration. For your listeners who are familiar with the work of Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock, they talk about the Younger Dryas floods. Well, that happened literally on top of my store. And so basically the theory is that there's this great lake. It was held back by the Ice Age dam, like an Ice Age glacial dam. That dam catastrophically failed. And in a single day, the entire contents of basically the Great Lakes in North America drained across Washington State, got caught up at the edge of the eastern edge of the gorge at a place called Wallula Gap, and then shot down the gorge at 70 miles an hour. Where my store is, that water was easily between 800 to 1,000 feet deep, running at 70 miles an hour, carrying with it trees and boulders and icebergs and anything that was living on the land, and absolutely scouring all the topsoil off of the gorge. And so you've got all those crazy magnetic layers now exposed like a live wire. And so that creates this really, like I said, unique and complex electromagnetic environment. And where that becomes like, well, what does that have to do with people having paranormal experiences? Back in the 80s and 90s, there was a professor at Laurentine University in Ontario, Canada. His name was Dr. Michael Persinger. And he was very interested in understanding how magnetic fields impacted human perception. And he created a device that the media eventually wound up calling it the God helmet. And he would manipulate magnetic fields around people's brains. Those magnetic fields would interact with the magnetite crystals, which are naturally occurring in human brains. There are some estimates that say in key structures, like the hippocampus and the temporal lobes, that there are 5 million magnetite crystals per gram of brain matter. Scientists believe that it's these magnetite crystals that animals that navigate long distances for migrations are using a sense of how those crystals are reacting to magnetic fields in order to navigate properly. But what Dr. Persinger found was that he could induce seemingly paranormal-like perceptions within people by manipulating these magnetic fields. Most commonly, people would perceive a sensed presence, like there was another conscious entity near them under certain magnetic conditions. He was also able to do things like turn on fear, like terror, with like the flip of a switch. So it's really clear that magnetic fields, electromagnetic fields, impact human perception in ways that are related to paranormal phenomena. And he did some studies related to haunted houses and glowing orbs and things like that. But remarkably, Dr. Persinger's work is impeccable from a scientific perspective. People have been able to replicate his results, and his methodology was spotless in terms of the scientific method. So it's real science that we're talking about, and it seems to be indicating that it can induce paranormal perceptions within the human brain. So the reason why the connection for me was there's an area, again, this is probably 4 miles west of my store, a place called Underwood Mountain. And last year we got a photograph someone had taken from upriver looking at the summit of Underwood Mountain. And there is clear as day a tic-tac shaped UAP hovering above the summit of this mountain. The mountain's about 3,000 feet, 3,500 feet maybe. And so, you know, its picture was taken at a distance, but as we zoomed in and did some image analysis on it, very clear that we're looking at some type of object. It has no wings or rotors. It's clearly not a lenticular cloud or some of the things that people often mistake as UFOs. And there it is, clear as day, captured on a photograph. Well, in that same area at the base of Underwood Mountain, at the river level, before we started our paranormal reporting program, I took a picture looking west down the gorge, and I was looking at these strange beams of light coming down and impacting the river. And in one of my pictures, there's a glowing blue orb, and it is, we talked to photographic experts, were able to rule out that it is not a lens flare. It's clearly not headlights reflecting off of something, not swamp gas. We don't know for sure what it is, but it certainly looks for all the world like a blue glowing orb. Some of your listeners may have seen pictures of ball lightning. It looks similar to that, but doesn't have any kind of electrical discharge coming off of it. And then people living on Underwood Mountain, we've heard, and a gentleman said that he observed 2 red glowing orbs sort of maneuvering and leapfrogging each other in the sky above his property. There's a number of vineyards on Underwood Mountain. And so he was out in that area. And then these orbs descended to the ground level. He said that they appeared to turn into a pair of eyes at that point, and they began approaching him. And then in his report, he described, and like a switch was thrown in my brain, I felt washed with terror. And I thought, that's a really interesting report. He ran into his house, grabbed a shotgun, and by the time he got outside, the phenomenon had ended. And when I heard in his report this notion that the emotion of terror was turned on in him with like a switch, it really harkened back to Dr. Persinger's work. So what's kind of, as you look at this from a objective lens, you can say, okay, well, are people here interacting with this strange electromagnetic fields and having localized personal hallucinations. Like that's a pretty reasonable hypothesis to make. Like, okay, something is happening, it's getting affected. It's not an actual real phenomenon. It's a hallucination, local to their own brain. The problem is that in this particular scenario, we've got photographs of the UAP hovering over the mountain. I've got a photograph that I know is not fake because I took it myself of a glowing orb at the base of this mountain. We've got hair samples, footprints, all types of physical evidence, and we have events that are co-witnessed. So my wife and I have seen glowing orbs with our naked eyes together. So localized hallucination is not going to leave physical evidence, it's not going to leave photographs, and it's not going to be co-witnessed by multiple people. So anyway, that's a little bit of a higher level explanation of a theory of what may be going on here. I think one of the ways to imagine this is imagine that you have a radio in your car and it is always set to talk radio. And as you're driving along, you are perceiving your environment to include the sounds of whatever's going on the talk radio, right? Well, if you make a minor adjustment to that electromagnetic receiver, suddenly you're not hearing talk radio in your environment. You're hearing classical music, or you're hearing rock and roll music, or you're hearing country music. And those signals are always present in the environment. It's just that your receiving apparatus is not tuned to receive them. And so you think that they don't exist. And if someone came back later and their radio was tuned to talk radio, they wouldn't hear the classical music and they would say, you're crazy. The only thing that's here is talk radio. That's all that you're getting. There's no other sounds, right? And so I think what's happening is a combination of our unique geology and electromagnetic environment combined with all kinds of other factors, including maybe solar wind and how that's impacting our magnetosphere, maybe even what you've ingested that day. Persinger's work seemed to indicate that high levels of calcium in a person could have an effect on some of these experiences that they were having. So I think that what happens is that, and then also this area is tectonically active. So we have earthquake swarms on the volcanic mountains all the time. And there are incredible stresses on a lot of these fault lines that are currently actively moving the earth and creating additional stresses and influencing these electromagnetic environments in that way. So again, it's a theory, and it's one of the ways that, as we're investigating what's going on here, we're trying to make these connections between, do these phenomena occur under what types of conditions, and is this unique geology influencing the extraordinarily high number of reports we're getting?
And I'm curious, James, when you talked earlier, you mentioned in the 80s and 90s when you were dropped and told, you're in a Sasquatch hive area. Did the military know they were there and say, hey, if you encounter this, do this? Or was it just talk amongst the soldiers who have gone before and saying, hey, if you hear this, don't freak out?
Well, so we never got a briefing that said, watch out for Sasquatch in this area. But part of what planted the idea is there's a U.S. Army survival manual back from the 70s, which is no longer in print, which has a page in it which talks all about encountering Sasquatch. Like it is part of the FM field manual, U.S. Army survival manual for Pacific Northwest soldiers. And it's got an entire page dedicated to Bigfoot-like creatures. And so that, of course, was huge fuel for the rumor mill fire. And then, you get out into some of these forests and you are in the middle of the deepest, darkest forest. And there's this moss that hangs off the trees that's hairy. And so, of course, everything you look at feels like you're looking straight at a Sasquatch. But in terms of the military's understanding of it, we have numerous reports. People have come into the store and said they were hiking or horseback riding in some of the wild range areas here in the gorge. And there's a lot of areas that are public land or this public access to. And we have, over a dozen reports of people running into soldiers or men in black SUVs telling them that this place is off limits and you can't go here. And when Mount St. Helens erupted, there are a number of stories of soldiers who were put on details to do two things. One was to collect and dispose of Sasquatch bodies. And there's stories of helicopters flying with nets full of Bigfoot carcasses away from certain areas. And there are some reports of soldiers who claim that they were part of a detail that traveled with an elder Sasquatch to a number of different caves in the area to see how the other Sasquatch tribes had survived the eruption. And from the sounds of these reports, it sounds like many did not. And so a number of the Bigfoot population, according to these reports, were killed during the eruption. And the U.S. government was instrumental in helping these populations of Sasquatch recover from that and then also dispose of the bodies that resulted from the deaths.
Mm.
But you had asked me earlier about this cat, and I got distracted with my whole geology story. So let me get back to that and tell you a little bit about some of the theories about what's going on with that. So on the Native American level, so this is one of the gorges, easily one of the most significant archaeological sites in the country in North America. And it's because the Columbia River was such an abundant source of food, particularly salmon. Millions and millions of salmon swim up this river every year. And in prehistoric times, this was one of the great gathering places, and Native American tribes from all the way from Arizona and Montana would come and meet here in the Columbia River Gorge area. So it's got a very rich and storied history with the Native American population. And in fact, there are many areas where there are petroglyphs you can see, and they're mostly visible in the desert side of the gorge. But there's a story, a tradition about a race of what they call underwater panther protectors. They're called the Mishepeshu. And these beasts, these beings, are described as looking like a black panther with the face of a man. And their role is as protectors. A lot of times in these Native American traditions, when you hear about something coming from the underwater realm or the earth realm or the sky realm, you're talking about a creature that's got 1 foot in the spirit world and 1 foot in our physical world. And so there's a tradition about that. There are petroglyphs in the area of strange cat-like beings. Nobody, even the Native Americans alive today, don't fully understand what all these petroglyphs mean. In fact, there are some traditions that say that these petroglyphs are actually painted by 18-inch tall, perfectly formed humans who lived in the rocks themselves. So that's one element to it. Obviously, a very spiritual, paranormal explanation. There is a place about 20 minutes north of the store called Isetti Ranch, and James Gilliland has been there for decades. It's sort of at the foot of Mount Adams. And Isetti stands for Enlightened Communication with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And for decades, people have gone to James's ranch and they've watched UAPs and UFOs fly around Mount Adams. People come as skeptics and they leave believers. And if you go to their website, isetti.org, you'll see a logo with a lion face in it. And that's because one of the extraterrestrial intelligences that they say that they're in contact with are a race of feline humanoids. And these are mostly have the body of a human, but the head of a lion. And so it's, again, that's they're reporting their beliefs about what they're encountering in the area. So those are a couple of what I would call very supernatural explanations. If you're looking for a more mundane or biological or, quote unquote, scientific explanation, we can look to the animal testing program at the Hanford Nuclear Lab just upriver. So just to put a little context around this, of course, we have cougars that live in the area, but cougars have some very important characteristics. Number one, they rarely get above 24 inches tall. That would be a really big cat for the area. Cougars are always like a tawny, like tannish color or a reddish color. They are never supposed to be black. There's only one big cat in North America that's black, and that's the jaguar, and its range is 1,000 miles south of Klickitat County. And then cougars are also terrified of humans, and they will abandon a fresh kill at the sound of a human voice. So when you look at all these characteristics, we know that we're looking at some type of creature that's different, because these black cats that people are reporting seem to be entirely unconcerned with humans. They're completely unafraid of people. They've got black fur, which is not supposed to be part of the cougar traits. And some of the reports say that they're enormous. So 40 feet tall to shoulder, bigger than a tiger. So we have all these reports. It begs the question, how could they have gotten here? An obvious thought is that, it's just some type of escaped exotic pet. And I think over in your side of the ocean, there was the Beast of Bodmin Moor, which was famous several years back.
Yeah. And
a lot of folks seem to conclude that that was some type of escaped exotic pet or something like that. But again, I don't think that mystery was ever solved. So over here, I began doing research just northeast of the store, upriver, is a place called the Hanford Nuclear Site. So we're going to rewind back to World War II. The Allies are terrified that the Nazis are going to unlock the secrets of the atom before we do, and then run roughshod over the world. So they spin up the Manhattan Project. Everyone knows that Oppenheimer is down at Los Alamos with his band of brilliant engineers. They're designing the bomb. But they needed a place where they could actually create the plutonium. They needed to have a, stand-up industrial scale nuclear reactors and actually start creating the fuel for these bombs. And so they chose this site in Washington for it. The Hanford Nuclear Site is basically 600 square miles. The government identified it as the best place to put this facility. They evicted everyone who lived there. They kicked the Native Americans off who had been hunting and burying their dead and, had sacred spiritual hunting grounds there. Everyone gets kicked off. The reason why this place is so ideal is that there is 45 miles of the Columbia River that flows right through the middle of it. And so they needed that water for cooling. And there's also a giant hydroelectric dam that was just installed. And that's where they're going to get the power to run these reactors and all the pumps and everything else that you need to forge this plutonium. And so you have to understand that Hanford was easily the most important nuclear site that the United States had. Over time, it became known as the Apocalypse Factory because they had 9 nuclear reactors running there during the Cold War, and they forged enough plutonium to build 60,000 nuclear weapons. So as serious as it gets with U.S. nuclear secrets and newest nuclear security, Hanford was the white-hot molten center of all of that. So back in World War II, everyone knows that they're worried about the Nazis creating the bomb, but the Nazis are also super interested in creating super animals and super soldiers, right? And so they even had a verified program where they brought back an extinct Ice Age creature called an aurochs. It was this gigantic, hyper-aggressive bull-like creatures. And they were successful in doing retrobreeding and all these other kind of things, and they actually populated a forest in Poland with these things. So the Nazis are doing all kinds of crazy stuff. The U.S. doesn't want to fall behind. So when they spin up Hanford, from day one, they have an animal testing program. And the guy that they assigned to lead this is a doctor from the University of Washington named Dr. Lauren Donaldson. And Donaldson's only academic achievement before getting this assignment was that he had actually created a super animal himself. It's a creature called the Donaldson super trout. And it is a fish that is 8 times larger and stronger than a normal trout. It reaches sexual maturity in half the time. It can swim in fresh water and salt water. It's got all these miraculous capabilities. And in fact, it's still a viable fish species today. So he's the guy that they set up as their animal tester at Hanford. Well, they developed the plutonium. It was Hanford plutonium that was the first nuclear explosion during the Trinity test. And then the Nagasaki bomb was also Hanford plutonium. And then from there on out, pretty much everything in the U.S. nuclear arsenal was from Hanford. Well, we win World War II. They announced Hanford was a thing, and then they immediately close it back down because the Soviets are scooping up Nazi scientists for their own nuclear program. And so we start scooping up Nazi scientists through Operation Paperclip. And Hanford becomes again a lockdown, top secret operation. Well, Donaldson winds up going down to the South Pacific. He's involved with like all that Bikini Atoll testing and the disastrous Castle Bravo event and all that kind of stuff. But he stays in touch with the new guy in charge, a guy named Bill Bear. And Bill Bear is running this animal testing lab. Under his command, it grows to enormous size. Like they can house 1,000 large animals there at a time. And they're doing all kinds of crazy testing. You have to understand, like back in the 40s and 50s, like we didn't know very much about how radiation impacted biological systems. And so they're doing tests like if a cow wanders through fallout, can you still drink its milk? Is the milk radioactive? You know, what happens to sheep's wool? Like a lot of really important kind of stuff. And I listened to 3 oral interviews with Bill Bear, talking about his time running the animal testing laboratory. What sort of tipped me off to it was I saw a newspaper article that said that they found a boxcar filled with radioactive animal carcasses in the desert near Hanford. So Hanford was closed in the 80s and is now the biggest Superfund site in America because of all the toxic waste that was left there, including boxcars filled with animal carcasses, radioactive. And so Bill describes how at one point they were conducting radiation experiments on apex predators, and those apex predators escaped and they could not recapture them afterwards. And basically he tells a story of how they were irradiating alligators, and he even holds up a picture in one of these interviews of the device that they were using X radiation on these creatures with. And so they had probably 30 alligators, and earlier one of them escaped. It got into the Columbia River and a fisherman caught it, and the fisherman had it stuffed and it was displayed in the sporting goods store in that community. Well, the Department of Energy showed up because this thing was radioactively hot and they had to confiscate this thing, and it was kind of a disaster that this animal escaped and it was found by a fisherman. Well, fast forward a couple of years later, 5 more of these gators outsmart, these are the experimental apex predators that they're irradiating. They outsmart the scientists and escape from their pen, and all 5 now escape into the Columbia River. And so at this point, they kind of panic and they put out a press release that says, a couple of animals escaped from the lab. You know, if you see them, report them to our folks. Meanwhile, they have this covert Army hunting team, and every day for 6 months, this Army hunting team is going out looking to kill these alligators. And they only caught 3 of the 5 that escaped. So there were still 2. So they escaped like in July. In January, they decided to call off the hunt. They said, yeah, these things will never survive the winter. Now, remember that these alligators are swimming in the runoff of a nuclear reactor, so the water is coming out hot. Like there's plenty of reason why they might be able to survive the winter. And alligators can, survive being frozen in a lake. Well, Bill Bear in his interviews describes how even deep into the 80s, like he's getting calls from Fish and Wildlife people asking if he knows anything about alligators in the Columbia River, and he just says no and hangs up on them. And in the interview, he laughs about how hilarious it is that he was able to pull the wool over their eyes. And so what that means is that it is 100% confirmed historically. There's plenty of documentation. Absolutely true that the animal testing laboratory at Hanford was experimenting on apex predators. Once they had those creatures, they couldn't contain them, and once they escaped, they couldn't recapture them. So what does it have to do with big black cats? Well, before I can tell you that, I need to tell you about dolphins. So since 1958, the U.S. government has used dolphins to guard our nuclear stockpiles. In fact, in the 1980s, a quarter of the entire U.S. nuclear stockpile was guarded by dolphins. And the reason why is that many of our nuclear sites, like our nuclear subsites and our reactor sites, most of them are on waterways. And one of the biggest threats would be Soviet scuba divers coming in and surveilling or sabotaging your site. And so it's really hard to detect a scuba diver on sonar because you don't know if that's a sea lion or a tuna fish or whatever. But you can train a dolphin to tell the difference. And what they would do is they'd rig these dolphins up with a special like harpoon spike on the end of their snouts. And they would train those dolphins to ram that spike into the flesh of the diver. A balloon would then inflate, the diver would be brought to the surface, and then they'd collect him up, because a dead diver at the bottom of the ocean doesn't tell you anything. You really want to gather intelligence about what they were doing there, and their equipment would tell you where they're from. And so this dolphin program, incredibly successful, a very is a feather in the cap of the nuclear defense forces here in the U.S. And then you've got Hanford. Now, Hanford is arguably our most important nuclear site. Back in the 50s, we had this thing called the Nike missile program. It was nuclear tipped surface to air missiles. The idea was you probably couldn't hit a bomber with 1950s technology, but if you exploded a nuclear missile near a bomber squadron, the blast would be big enough to take out anything that was there. Considered a perfectly acceptable risk to detonate nuclear weapons over U.S. civilian populations if it's taking out bombers that would have taken out Hanford, right? So we had 4 Nike missile sites at Hanford, more than any site in the country. And that's just to give you a sense of like how big a deal security was for this place. They had dudes on horseback, they had all kinds of crazy things. But their biggest challenge was with 45 miles of the river running through Hanford, that's 90 miles of river coastline that you need to guard. And how in the hell do you do that is an extremely difficult task. And so you're going to look at this dolphin program and see how successful that is. And then you're going to ask yourself, okay, what freshwater creatures can we train to be sentinels as well? You can't bring dolphins into the Columbia River because it's freshwater and dolphins only operate in saltwater. So you might try alligators, right? Like maybe we can train alligators to be sentinel creatures. But you'd certainly ask yourself this question: what is the world's most effective riverine hunter? The answer to that question is a black jaguar. Black jaguars can hold their breath for 15 minutes, which is longer than a dolphin, by the way. They can swim over a kilometer in the open ocean. They can eat underwater. Pound for pound, they're the strongest of the big cats. They've got night vision that's 6 times better than a human being. And as a bonus, they always instinctively drag their prey to shore. So if you're looking for a candidate creature, like what animal are we going to try to promote and train and perhaps modify to create a sentinel creature that can guard Hanford? A jaguar is absolutely at the top of the list. There's no question about it. And so what we believe happened was that just like the alligators, they had a jaguar modification and training program. They're trying to create sentinel creatures. Just like the gators, they couldn't contain them. They outsmarted the scientists there. And then once they escaped into the wild, there was no recapturing them. And if you look at geographically where Hanford is located, if you go north, east, or south of Hanford, you just head deeper into a barren desert. If you head west into Klickitat County, there's all kinds of available food sources and habitat, and just like a paradise for big black cats to survive in. So again, as crazy as it sounds, the most rational explanation for why we've got gigantic black cats running around Klickitat County is they escaped from a top secret government nuclear site.
Interesting.
Yeah. Very. Do you think there's any connection, James, with sort of interdimensional travel as well with some of these sort of strange cryptids that are...
It's a good question. And so, like I said, the majority of the reports of these cats, outside of its enormous size and the potential that some people are perceiving it to have a ape-like face, it could very well just be a biological creature. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that there is in the fossil record, an animal called Panthera atrox. It's a North American lion. Was alive during the Ice Age and absolutely lived here in Washington State. And so, you could make an argument that, yes, this is simply a biological creature. Maybe it's got some modifications to it, but there it is. There are some things that, again, there are some scattered reports. And just 2 weeks ago, not even, maybe 10 days ago, a woman came in and she was hiking with her sister and her sister's boyfriend. And this was south of the gorge. It wasn't exactly in the gorge area proper. And they came across a creature. So they came around a bend in a trail, and there was sort of a Y. And there was a creature, black fur, long black tail, cat-like body, drinking out of a puddle. And it looked up at them, and it had yellow eyes and a leathery face. So no fur on its face. And she said it had angry, like this angry expression on its face. And then it got up on its hind legs and ran off on its hind legs. Wow. So when you hear that story, there's no way that you can sort of morph that into there's a biological creature, there's some type of cat, maybe it's got some minor radioactive mutations or whatever to it. Like, that's a full-on therianthrope, human-animal hybrid, or a chimera, a combined animal type of thing. And those reports are really few and far between. Like I said, the vast majority of it, you can easily believe they're describing some type of biological creature that just isn't currently recognized by science. But we get a lot of reports like that. So there's that specific report. There's the handful of reports that describe this very intelligent eyes, ape-like face. When you start talking about those types of things, you're either talking about some type of different phenomenon altogether, or some type of shape-shifting creature, or something like that. And then you can start to speculate as to whether there's some type of interdimensional type of crossroads going on around here. We have a lot of reports of other strange cryptids that don't seem to fall into any normal categories. We've had reports of snakes with red frills on the side of their heads. We've had reports of hairless dog-like creatures that are able to whistle and are, larger than Great Danes. We've had reports of a white furred creature that didn't seem to have a head that was able to keep pace with a car for it going over 20 miles an hour for a distance on a dirt road. So in some ways, like, a part of me wants to believe, okay, we've got these pockets of biodiversity. The gorge and the Cascade Mountains are such a wild and rugged wilderness that it's conceivable that, just like in the Congo, there are reports of strange creatures because it's such a remote wilderness and you can't get back in there, that our Sasquatch populations are biological creatures, and that our ape cat populations are also biological creatures. We hear reports of people seeing these cats with cubs, younglings. And so they seem to be a reproducing population. And then you hear some other stories that, man, like, you can't shoehorn a normal biological explanation into. And, you mix in these Native American traditions that talk about this blending of the spirit world and the physical world. And you really have to ask yourself, is there something more going on here? The other day, I was talking to a person who's a remote viewer. So so for your listeners who don't know, remote viewing is when people use their mental abilities to see things that are at a distance, either in the past, the present, and with limited success into the future. But it's really just a focusing of human thoughts, and then there's a protocol about how you record what you're experiencing. And say what you want about it doesn't fit, how we understand materialist worldview to work. They're effective, and they're employed by the U.S. government. And this gentleman had spent time working with counterterrorism, and he does professional work for private businesses and things like that. And he had a team take a look at what's going on here in the gorge, and particularly with the UAP activity near Mount Adams. And the whole team was coming back with a very unusual set of data. And they were talking about that there is some type of, and they were using terms that you don't normally see in a UAP remote viewing. So normally in a UAP remote viewing, you're going to hear things like craft, vehicle, structures, more technical type terms. Consistently, the whole team independently was getting terms like chariot and Vimana, and terms that you would find in some of the ancient spiritual texts of
Sure.
Iman are flying craft from the Hindu Sanskrit text, Bhagavad Gita, and things like that. And so they were getting a lot of these almost archaic, almost biblical references for what they were seeing, and they were getting terms like guardians and also gateway, which is different than portal or door. And the picture that began to emerge, much to the surprise of the leader of this remote viewing team, was that what they seem to be finding with their remote viewing, take it for whatever that's worth, is that there are a race of almost angelic beings, some of them with lion-like features, protecting a gate to a heavenly dimension of atoms. I'm still trying to make sense of what that means. I mean, just as a person who lives in the world, that sounds pretty amazing. It sounds pretty awesome. Like, wouldn't it be cool if that was true? But there's definitely a sense when you're in this area, when you look at Mount Adams, when you're driving through the gorge, that you know that you're in a place that is different. Like, you can feel it inside of your body. And there's also a sense, like, on the Washington side of the river, the Mount Adams area, there doesn't seem to be malevolence. There seems to be a higher vibrational tone to a lot of these encounters that people have. And according to this remote viewer's reporting, he's saying that, yeah, this whole area is somehow protected because of this very important gateway. I don't know what to make of all that. Again, you know, I can tell you what the reports are. I don't have personal experience with that. I can tell you that the number of portal sightings we've had, you listen to these things and it's almost impossible to believe. One gentleman described how he was driving through the desert area, saw what he thought was like a sign to maybe an indie casino, turned out to be a portal. He stopped and parked his car in front of it, and a black metallic cube flew out of it and then flew down the gorge.
Wow.
He has a picture of it on his Nokia phone.
Wow.
And so it's been such a remarkable experience first of all, how awesome it is to be someone who's trusted. You know, people come up to me in restaurants and in the grocery stores and they want to tell me their stories because we have a reputation of being a safe place to tell them. But how amazing is it, you know, that this is a place where so many questions are left unanswered. There's still a sense of true wonder and enchantment here. It's been a remarkable experience, and I'm still enjoying the unfolding of it.
Well, I'd love to go and visit one day. Really
Yeah,
would.
bucket list.
Yeah, so like I said, there's so much to describe. You know, I can pretty much, you know, any questions that you have or anything else. I don't know how much time we have left for the show today, but happy to continue on.
Yeah. I was just wondering, obviously, with all these creatures and like being seen, has there ever been any evidence, like actual physical evidence of these being there, or has nobody ever brought anything like that forward?
We've had hundreds of hair samples that have been brought into the store. There are numerous footprints and footprint castings, photographs. You know, it's you know, there's certain levels of proof. You know, in this day and age, photographs are highly suspect, no matter who's bringing them forward.
Yeah.
And, you know, the only thing that I can say is if you come out here and you experience this stunningly beautiful, wondrous landscape for yourself, like, you'll feel it. Like, it's the kind of thing where it's so easy to make of anything these days. And there's no way that I could convince somebody who hasn't experienced it firsthand to take my word for it. And I wouldn't expect anyone to. I mean, the healthy skepticism says one guy's collection of reports, secondhand reports, are not worth that much. But come here for yourself and see, like, experience what it's like to be here in the gorge, and you'll know that you're in a place that's different than any other place you've ever been in your life.
Wow. Do you think that might be down to the whole sort of Persinger's laboratory kind of thing with the electromagnetic activity, or do you think it's something different?
Well, something affects you when you're here. Like, even if you're spiritually not open to anything, you come down here and it is, I'm not exaggerating when I say it is jaw-droppingly beautiful here. Like, right now, the hillsides are rioting with wildflowers, and the waterfalls are at their full flow, and everything is lush and vibrant and green. And you come here and it takes your breath away. And you could, on the one hand, you could say, okay, I'm just looking at things that are visually just stunningly beautiful. But I think that there's more going on than that. And even those who you can't help but experience a sense of awe here.
Wow.
And, I think, like, to me, that's the proof is in the pudding. I've talked to so many folks, and when I talk, I mean, like, everyday people and senior law enforcement folks have told me stories. And a lot of these stories are really, really boring. Like, I was driving my ATV and a giant cat jumped across the trail and scared the crap out of me, and I never saw it again. Like, no one's making a mini series out of that story, right? Like, it's, some of these things are just such mundane, kind of fleeting experiences. And to me, that lends to their credibility. And they're everyday folks, and these ordinary people having these extraordinary experiences. I've heard enough of them myself I'm fully bought in. I believe it. I've had some experiences with my own two eyes.
I was just going to ask you that question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, there's the photograph of the glowing orb, and then the eyewitness account that my wife and I have had of those similar orbs in that same area. About, again, before we started our reporting program, there's an area called Horse Thief Butte. So this is in the desert side of the gorge. Imagine like a classic flat top, steep cliffed mountain, butte. And what's unique about Horse Thief Butte is that when you look at it from a distance, it looks like a monolithic, just huge piece of rock. But when you get up close to it, you find that it is riddled with a labyrinth of hidden passageways and amphitheaters, and there are petroglyphs on the walls and access ways to climb up onto the top of it. And so Horse Thief Butte is an area of great spiritual power. The Native Americans would go there and build what these sort of rock nests, and they would wait to be visited by their spirit animals. And it's clear that this place has got a long history in terms of its spiritual connection to the land. And if you look down through one of the gaps of Horse Thief Butte, you can see Horse Thief Lake. It's about 700 yards away. It's a big lake. And then on the far side of Horse Thief Lake is, they call it Petroglyph Park. Basically, there's over 40 petroglyphs in this one area. You can drive right up and check them all out. It's where that petroglyph of the cat is. Well, I was sitting up there at sunset one evening, looking down into the lake, and I saw this enormous creature swimming in the lake. There was waterfowl on the water surface, so I could kind of estimate its size. It was clearly bigger than a human being, but smaller than a car, so somewhere in that range. It was dark in color, too far away for me to make it any details, and I watched it for about 20 minutes, and it was swimming in circles in the lake, almost like patrolling the middle of the lake, and it would submerge for up to 5 minutes and come back up. And for the life of me, I could not figure out what it was. Now, to be clear, as a soldier and a firefighter and a mountain guide and a search and rescue EMT, I've spent thousands of hours in the wilderness. I know what the creatures are around here. I know what they look like. I know how they behave. The only creatures that come close in size might be a bear. It was big. It would be a really big bear. But bears are point-to-point swimmers. They don't submerge. Like, that's not part of their behavior set. An elk, another creature that it might have been, but again, a point-to-point swimmer, not one that would submerge. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it, and I could not figure out what it was. Like, there was no creature in the whole lexicon of all the things that live out here that was that size, that color, and maneuvering in the water that adeptly. And I just sort of wrote off like, I do not know what this thing is. It was only after we started getting these reports of the ape cat and that I did the research and learned about the Mishepeshu as this underwater panther protectors, and I learned about the swimming capabilities of jaguars, that I realized that it may have been a cat that I was seeing swimming there. Fascinating to me that is basically a straight line between my eyes, this creature, and the petroglyph of this strange cat-like creature in the Petroglyph Park area. So that's my unconfirmed possible sighting of this giant cat-like creature we have out here in Klickitat County.
Wow.
So, James, I'm kind of curious because you brought up portals, and when you and I were talking about them, you were like, it was different sky in the portal than what was outside of the portal, so you knew it was a portal. And we were talking backstage, and you mentioned there's new portal sightings. Can you share some of those?
Yeah, I think the big one that I just got last week was that one where the giant or the black metallic cube flew out of one. I mean, the guy watched it right there. You know, I've had some unusual experiences myself there. So, you know, like there's a traditional, what people imagine as a portal, basically where you see some type of rift. It's usually floating in the air, and the things behind it don't look like the rest of the background behind it. And so there's a number of reports like that. There's also a number of reports of people having missing time and being spatially displaced, like not knowing how they got from where they were to where they currently are. And so I've had that experience myself in an area we called Broke Lake Barrows. This is a 8,000-year-old lava bed. It's some of the most rugged terrain I've ever seen in my life. It's basically these jagged volcanic rocks that erupted and cooled, and it's almost like, imagine like an icy river that someone drove a bulldozer through, and you have all that sort of, you know, jagged ice stuff. Well, that's a lot like what Broke Lake Barrows is like, but it's 24 square miles. It's an area the size of the island of Manhattan. And no one goes in there because compasses don't work reliably. Cell phones don't work. My drone had trouble acquiring a GPS signal. There are no trails out there. The local hunters refuse to go in there. People have gone missing in this area. Numerous Sasquatch sightings, numerous footprints in the area of Sasquatch. And so this area is a really curious place to me. It's so remote and inaccessible. You could easily imagine that there are like 11 Ewok villages of Sasquatches living in here and no one would ever know. Like, it is that remote and that inaccessible. And I was out there flying my drone, and so what often happens with this lava is that a lava tube will form. So basically the outside of the lava that's flowing, like the top of it hardens, and then it insulates the lava that flows within it. Then all that lava flows out and you get a void, like a tubular cave. And then earthquakes occur and then those caves collapse, right? And so you get trenches. And I was flying my drone up and down a north-south trench. So like I parked my 4x4 at the edge of the lava field and walked in probably 200 yards. You could still see my rig. And I flew this drone up and down this collapsed trench. And then at the southern end of this trench, my drone hit a tree and it fell down to the ground. So I went down there and picked it up. And, you know, it was an area that I had been in before, so I knew it pretty well. And so then I walked from the south end of that trench to the north end of that trench, about 150 yards. Took a 90-degree turn. I'm now facing west, away from my car. And I walk another 300 yards deeper into Broke Lake Barrows. And I find another really cool trench. So I start flying my drone up and down this trench. And I started looking around, and I looked over my shoulder, and I could see my rig. And it turns out that I was back at the southern end of the first trench that I was in, where I had crashed the drone. So basically, I had been transported, unbeknownst to me, probably a total of 400 yards, and I was now facing a completely different direction that I had been facing. Really unsettling. So I have been doing professional land navigation since I was 19 years old in the Army. As a search and rescue EMT, I am literally the kind of person you call when someone else gets lost in the woods. I cannot recall the last time that I was turned around in the woods or didn't know where I was, or had been in a place that I had already been and didn't recognize it. And here I was standing at a place that I had already been, what I thought was just 10 minutes ago. And now I find myself there completely unaware of how I got there. And I didn't even realize this was a place I had already been until it was almost like waking up from a dream. And it took me like 5 minutes of flying the drone to realize, oh my gosh, this is a place that not only have I been, I know pretty well. And I didn't recognize it. So really unsettling. And very clear to me that I have no recollection or knowledge of how I got from what I thought was, 300, 400 yards away to being back in the place where I started. No logical explanation for it. There's like no way to account for it, especially, like I said, I've been doing this land navigation stuff at a very high professional level nearly my whole life for over 3 decades. And there are things that you're doing, like you're keeping track of the sun, you're keeping track of your pace count, you're laying down landmarks, you're building mental maps. Like there's a whole set of things that you do when you're navigating in especially an intense type of a situation. And boy, I'll tell you, that was something that I had never experienced before, and I have no idea what occurred. In retrospect, if there was a population of entities or beings in this part of the world, in this Broke Lake Barrows area, and they didn't want me to go deeper in there, this was probably the most benevolent way to bounce me back to start and prevent me from getting into any deeper trouble. There's no physical harm to me, just a little bit of fogginess in the brain for a little while, and placed at a safe place that I knew where I was, that was close to my vehicle. So like my ultimate takeaway was, wow, if something did bounce me, it was benevolent and kind and not seeking to do me any kind of harm. So, anyway, very strange experience.
Yeah. Did you experience any kind of missing time when that happened?
Yeah. So I'm really fortunate in that sometimes on my way to work, I'll take a little detour and go do some exploring. And so I thought that, I was gone for like a half an hour on this little detour, and got back. It was like 3 hours later. And so there was a significant amount of time that I had expended that I'm not sure how that occurred.
I'm curious, James, when you had this experience with the drone, did the drone record while you were moving? Yeah. Did it record how you got where you were, or did it just stop and start?
So I wasn't flying the drone continuously while I was walking. Like I would get to an area and it's like, oh, this looks like a good place to fly. And again, I was having trouble with the GPS capturing signals, right? So the drone wasn't communicating with the satellites, although I had clear skies. So that was weird. But I have footage of the areas where I ended up, but I wasn't flying the drone when I was going what I thought was deeper into the Broke Lake Barrows wilderness area.
Did you ever think about going back to see if you could get back to that place where you were bumped around?
I go back frequently, in fact.
Right.
And I've walked around the same route that I thought that I was on before, and don't know. That same remote viewer guy said that they were looking for areas where Sasquatch could be living in the area, and this area, this Broke Lake Barrows area, lit up for them significantly. So when they get their reports, like they describe certain features and then they go look for those features. And this place is the only place in the area that matched the features that they were describing. But excuse me, what's really strange is people have gone missing here and they've disappeared without a trace. And there's a guy named Chris Zitzowitz in September 18th of 2013, he was out there with his buddy looking for a cave entrance. They got separated. Excuse me. They get separated for just a few minutes. And then he disappeared off the face of the planet. And no one has found even a shred of evidence of what happened to them. And they had over 100 searchers, thousands of man hours. They had dogs, they had helicopters. They even brought in the Air Force Pararescue Team, which is sort of the elite of the elite search and rescue teams. Mm-hmm. And they found nothing. Wow. And the thing about Broke Leg Burrows is that, as a search and rescue EMT, I've been on scores of searches, and we never get military boots on the ground. Like, the best you can hope for normally is, a chopper or something like that. The fact that they send actual troops there to do searching, unheard of. And why that occurred is pretty mysterious. There's one 4x4 track that leads into a tiny portion of the southern end of this Broke Leg Burrows. It's a really weird thing. There's no commercial reason for there to be a 4x4 track in there. Like, there's no logging that goes on there, no mineral extraction. And this road leads to like this strange collection of pools, these volcanic sinkholes that are filled with water. And I was out there exploring and trying to figure out what was happening there, and I found bullet casings. Having been a soldier, I was able to identify that these are 5.56 NATO rounds that were being fired, and they looked like they were being fired in all directions. Again, wow. Inconclusive. I mean, it could have been some jokers with their AR-15s out there, but there's so many strange and mysterious things about this Broke Leg Burrows area. In fact, just south of there, we had 9 witnesses were laying in a field watching a meteor shower, and they saw these 2 satellites sort of tracking each other, and once those satellites got right over them, they shot down a green sheet-like laser that scanned the forest and scanned the field and scanned the people in the field and the rest of the field and off again. Wow. And so I called the Department of Natural Resources, Washington State DNR, and asked them if they were flying any LiDAR missions in September of 2023 in the evenings. They said no, that they weren't. And by the way, their LiDAR is infrared and invisible to the human eyes. You would have never seen it. Yeah. They contacted their vendor who does the flying, and the vendor said, well, sometimes we will use green lasers for bathymetric scanning. So if they want to scan underwater, they will use the green laser. But they only fly at night. They only fly in the early morning. They never fly at night. And they didn't have any missions tasked for them in September of 2023 either. They told me that the only other entity that might be doing some scanning like that would be the military. And if the military was doing it, they wouldn't have told them what or why they were doing it. And so, you can make a reasonable inference that the military is now scanning this area with bathymetric lasers for reasons that are unknown, because there aren't any waterways that we can see, particularly in September evenings. So very weird, very strange stuff going on out there.
Very interesting.
I'm kind of curious, James, your thoughts of how you were misplaced, and you said in a benevolent way. Do you feel it's because the energies and beings there see you, see what you do, know that you're not there to harm them or cause mischief, so they were like, okay, let's just gently move him over here so he doesn't get in trouble? Or
that's a story I like to tell myself. It's better than the alternative, right? I mean, I think it's very rare that we hear about hostile encounters. I mean, there are encounters where people are certainly afraid, like they find themselves having an experience that they don't understand, or they feel like their pets might be in danger, and so they get concerned. But I really can't recall any reports of people feeling like they're being attacked or being malevolently harassed. And so hard to say. I mean, I would love to think that they are aware of my intentions and they're taking care of me, and they're ensuring that they're gently keeping me out of trouble. But I guess only time will tell in more investigations.
So, Matt and Kell, do you have any other questions?
I was just going to touch on something. You talk about Bigfoot and Sasquatch as well. People, all the impression that I've got from all of that is that they don't smell so good. And when they're around, people know, you can smell them. Have you experienced that kind of thing?
We've had a lot of reports about the smell of the Sasquatch. And so many of the reports include that pungent, profoundly pungent odor. And so we do get that. I haven't experienced it myself.
Okay. Yeah. Cal, you got any questions?
Not that I can think of at the top of my head. You've already asked the ones I was going to ask, so they've been answered. But yeah, it's a seems like a very interesting place.
Yeah, I'd go one day. I'd love to go.
Yeah, I think that'll have to go down on my bucket list. So
yeah,
if you guys know how to get a hold of me, I'd be happy to show you around if you come over.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah, that'd be so cool.
But for everyone else in your audience, I encourage you to check out margiesoutdoorstore.com. So we've got some of our paranormal information there, and our paranormal reporting forms are there. We asked that only for reports from the gorge area. Outside of that, it's a little much for me to manage all of it. Also, we're on Facebook at Margie's Outdoor Store on Facebook, and on YouTube, and on Instagram. And our Facebook account, we usually try to give some updates about recent paranormal reports and stuff like that. So go ahead and check that out. And look for more from us in the future.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So you also have a book, James.
We've got a couple of guides to some of the paranormal hotspots in the gorge, but we only sell those at the store. And so folks can come in and pick them up there. But one focuses on the Horse Thief Butte area, which I talked a little bit about here. Another one focuses on a place called Beacon Rock, which is a 840-foot tall monolith, the cold core of an ancient volcano. And there are lots of strange stories about the stuff that goes on around there.
Wow.
Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, we've gone a bit over the time, so I think we're going to have to start wrapping it up there. So, any more questions, guys, before we go?
Probably, but I can't think of any. I've probably got loads. It'd be nice to have you back on again, James, one day. Maybe.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael?
So, thank you, James, for coming on, and thank you, everyone that's watching. And Matt, how are you going to send us out?
I just want to thank James for coming on the show. It's been really interesting, a really interesting guy. Some great stories, great information, and thank all of our viewers for watching. And we'll be back very soon for another episode of Paranormal Versus. So from myself, Michael and Kell, and James, I suppose, wish everyone a good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.